And I am going to officially welcome everyone. And as usual, I see many familiar faces and a few newcomers. It's really nice to see you guys as well. So Democrats Abroad Greece is happy to welcome you to our final Cafe Neon of the season. And those of you who are new to Cafe Neon, it is a speaker and discussion series that we are organizing to better understand issues that are facing American voters and to stay in touch with the DAGR community. I'm Sarah Jane Kidd-Leone, and I am coordinating the Cafe Neon, and I vote from Texas. And it would be great if you can all put your name and your state that you vote from into the chat box. And any questions later that come to your mind for the presentation, please feel free to put them in. We have some of our executive committee online. They're all collaborators and help bring this program to you. Raise your hands for some recognition. We have Karen and Stacy, our chair Stacy, who has been leading DAGR with great success. And thank you all for joining us. Our secretary, Karen Lee, is going to be taking care of everybody this evening, and I am going to turn it over to her.
Thank you, Sarah Jane, she said hesitantly. I want to give you a little context. In 2015, Vice Chair Steve Medeiros and I were just settling in. By 2016, Steve had decided that our time had come. So he rented the space down in Glasmona Square, and Andrea gave us advice. Ted Theo helped set up in the morning, and Steve's then significant other, Tony, came down to help until I got there. And we spent the rest of the day in sweltering heat, handing out pamphlets that our issues chair, Kristen Zizis, had written. It was wonderful. It was a really nice time. In 2017, Athens Pride moved to Syntagma Square, and so did we. And we had volunteers. Anna Houghton, Jay Salvador, Charity Moskopoulos, and others. I can't even remember from year to year all the names. Steve got us a marching banner in honor of the US elections that said, "Love trumps hate." And we then stood by to explain that one to our Greek visitors. In 2018, we were also celebrating the first civil union performed by Athens Mayor Kaminis, and that was Steve and Tony. It was perhaps the last year of growing acceptance for the LGBTQ community in the US, for transgender teens finding their true identities, and for much more. It's been a pushback ever since. 2019 and the pushback state laws were starting to pick up. So our visitors grew and our volunteer corps grew. And then it was 2020, COVID, lockdowns, and limbo. We are back, and we need volunteers and visitors more than ever. And a bit later, DAGR Chair Stacy will let you know how to join up. Having said all of that, what I'd like to do now is express my great pleasure in introducing Bob Vallier. Bob is an LGBTQ warrior and much else in Dems Abroad, regional and global efforts since, I don't know, Bob, as long as I've known you. When did you start in DA? And when did you start working on all of these issues that are going to culminate in your presentation tonight? Bob?
Well, it's a complicated history. I've been in DA twice. So the first time was when I was a graduate student in Paris in the 90s. And back then, I mean, this is the 90s, right? And just to give you a little bit of context, I just watched the series finale of Dairy Girls on Channel 4 in the UK. If you've not seen this show, you should. It's quite charming. And it's about a group of high school girls and one boy in the mid-90s in Londonderry when the Troubles are coming to an end. And the series ending is really quite sweet, but it got me very nostalgic for the 90s. It was a great decade that really began in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall and saw in rapid succession the release of Nelson Mandela, who later on became president of South Africa. And negotiated, national reconciliation effort there. Labor won for the first time in 30 years. And okay, Tony Blair turned out to be a bit of a jerk, but it was still exciting when it happened. And the economy was booming and auto-tune hadn't been invented yet, so music was great. But Democrats Abroad was just a sleepy organization at the time. because there wasn't that much to do. Things were going well, right? So in Paris, it was kind of like a sewing circle in a lot of ways. And so I was not very involved at the time because it just seemed like a social club for, I'm sorry to say, rich old ladies. Then I finished my dissertation and went back to the United States and worked there for a number of years and came back to Paris in 2009. I had worked on Obama's campaign and felt like, okay, mission accomplished, and escaped back to Paris and became involved again in Democrats Abroad almost immediately because it had grown considerably because of the whole experience of the Bush years and had taken on a new tone and a new tenor. So I started to become very involved in 2009 in Paris. And I made the mistake of articulating a coherent thought with a complete sentence. And so everybody said, that guy should be in charge of something. And the rest is, as it were, history. And now here I am.
And now, are you ready to go with Roe v. Wade and what happens to us if it goes down?
Yes, I am.
Ricky Marr, take it away.
All right. Let me say, first of all, thank you for having me. Good evening. Buonasera a tutti. Gaia kalispera, efkaristo puetati. It's the best Greek I can muster. And I want to talk a little bit about the consequences of the destitution of Roe v. Wade for the LGBT community. And I want to begin with provocation. Something that you may not like to hear. I don't even like to utter it, but I'm going to say it anyway. Justice Alito is right. Ladies, you do not have a constitutional right to abortion. We should actually stop using that language. What Roe v. Wade is really about is not that. That's just a sort of subsidiary thing. What Roe v. Wade is about is a constitutional right to privacy. Now, you do not have a constitutional right to privacy expressly written into the Constitution. And in fact, if you do a word search of the US Constitution, you will not find privacy anywhere. You may find the adjective private used as an adjective to modify the noun property. But other than that, you will not find a reference to a right to privacy. This is exactly why Roe v. Wade is important, and where Justice Alito is wrong. I mean, he's wrong in many places, but the fact that he does not recognize this in the opinion, I mean, he sort of does, he focuses on this language of abortion, right? At the expense of talking about privacy. So what Roe v. Wade does as an opinion, among other things, is affirm a previous opinion. A previous opinion known, perhaps you know it, Griswold v. Connecticut. Griswold v. Connecticut from 1968. And Griswold is an interesting case for a lot of reasons. The Griswold in question was the director of the state Planned Parenthood, who sued the state of Connecticut on behalf of married couples. Why? Because the state of Connecticut said that married couples did not have a right to birth control. So birth control products of all sorts were regulated by the state and denied even to married couples. Pretty crazy, right? So this case wound its way through the courts and eventually to the Supreme Court. And the justices then found that this is their phraseology, in the penumbra of the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments to the Constitution, there is something like a right to privacy. Or more specifically, there is a zone of privacy that is protected by what is expressed in those amendments. Now, let's recall quickly, the First Amendment, your classic rights, right? The right to free speech, to freedom of religion, to freedom of association. So really sort of big fundamental rights there. The Fourth Amendment is about search and seizure, right? So your private property, which may well include your body, is protected from unlawful search and seizure by the government, unless they have a compelling state interest in doing so. I'll come back to that phrase in a few minutes. The Fifth Amendment is normally the one that's invoked on law and order, right? You have the right to remain silent. Well, really what that right is about is due process. We are each entitled to due process under the law. And the Ninth Amendment is kind of like the 10th Amendment, but for individuals, right? Just because there is not a right that is explicitly articulated here does not mean it doesn't exist. The 10th Amendment is about states' rights, very famously, that those powers and duties that are not explicitly ascribed to the federal government are reserved to the states. In addition to those four fundamental ones, 1, 4, 5, and 9, the justices in Griswold also invoked the 14th Amendment, which is about your rights as a citizen, basically, and again about due process. That every citizen of the United States is entitled to due process under the law. And this is an important phrase too, citizen born, not unborn, born in the United States, or naturalized as an American citizen is entitled to due process under the law. So in Griswold, they said that these rights together, right, the first, fourth, fifth, ninth, plus the 14th amendments generate a kind of a shadow, a kind of a zone in which we can perceive something like a right to privacy. And this zone of privacy includes minimally your private property, right? So what is your private property? Your house, obviously, your domicile, but also your own personal piece of property, your body. And so therefore, unless the state has a compelling state interest to disrupt that right or to otherwise limit it, then you are entitled to do as you please with your private property, with your body. And if that means that you want to use birth control, particularly in a married couple, you have a fundamental right to do so. And the state of Connecticut did not, the court found, have a compelling state interest in limiting that right. So the laws in Connecticut and also across the nation that sought to limit access to birth control were struck down. That was in 1968. A few years later, 6 years later, in 1974, Roe is decided. And Roe affirms that finding, that in the Constitution, there is a zone of privacy. There is, in the penumbra of these fundamental rights, something like a right to privacy. And because your body is your private piece of property, that right to privacy covers, or that zone of privacy includes your body and your right to autonomously decide what to do with it. And again, the state only in situations where there is a compelling state interest, provided that everyone has been subject to due process, only then can they limit it. So in cases of compelling state interest, we might say it did not come to this recently. It did not make its way through the courts to the Supreme Court, but we could imagine that the state has a compelling state interest in requiring you to wear masks during a pandemic with potentially deadly consequences, right? Or can compel you to get vaccinations for a disease that might have deadly consequences. Now, at no time did the courts ever hear a case about this, but when the smallpox vaccine was invented, when the polio vaccine was invented and approved, there were discussions, public discussions, political discussions that maybe, and this is before Griswold and before Roe, that the state did have a compelling interest in seeing the citizenry of the United States vaccinated against these diseases. And back then there were anti-vaxxers. They were not nearly as vociferous and not nearly as stupid as they are now, but they did exist, and there were people who tried not to get vaccinated. Some of them succeeded. There are sometimes funny stories about what they did to avoid getting vaccinated. But the vast majority of Americans were vaccinated against smallpox and vaccinated against polio. And as a result of that, we don't have smallpox anymore, and we don't really have polio anymore. If it had come to a legal argument or a judicial argument, that might have been the direction that the Solicitor General would have taken before the courts in order to demonstrate a compelling state interest. But in the state of Connecticut, in Griswold, and later on in Roe v. Wade, the people who were defending the interests of the compelling state interest in trying to limit abortion did not, in the court's view, make a compelling argument. Now, there's also been a lot of talk, just as a quick parenthesis here, that Roe is not well argued. And there is some degree of truth to that. It is not the most, when you look at it through the lens of logic. I have my PhD in philosophy, so I have a professional deformation in this regard. But when you look at it through sort of the lens of logic, it's not the strongest argument that you could possibly imagine, but it's not a bad argument either. And it appeals to history, to culture, to long-standing tradition, both within the history of the United States, but also the history of humanity. And so one reason why Christian conservatives, evangelicals in particular, don't like the argumentation is because part of the history and part of the culture to which the justices appeal, in the opinion, are outside of the Christian context. They look to ancient Greece and to medical practices that were common then, and they look to ancient Rome and the Roman Empire, and to other ancient cultures and how antique, I guess, cultures, and how they treated abortion as a health practice. So the practice has been around for as long as pregnancy has, so a very long time, and has been used frequently in many cultures. The ancient Greeks had recipes for abortions. The Romans had practices for them. Even Benjamin Franklin very famously had his own recipe for an abortion concoction that would induce an abortion. So even within American history, right, since the founding, there has been a traditional practice, including within the sort of domain of midwifery, to induce abortions, whether the pregnancy was wanted or whether it was potentially problematic and a risk to the woman's health. So when Alito says that, within our history, within our tradition, Americans have never, so he's just wrong. He's just flat out wrong about that. It is true, he does make this particular argument that after the Civil War, there were a number of states that sought to outlaw abortion, but that was contrary to the practice of the previous 100 years of American history. So it's a complicated story, historically and culturally. But anyway, that was a parenthesis, all of that. So back to Roe v. Wade. It establishes the right to privacy, which otherwise we do not have. And since 1974, a large number of cases have been argued on the basis of this right to privacy. And a couple of the most famous and surprisingly recent cases have to do with the LGBT community. One of them is Lawrence v. Texas, which was decided in 2002, right? 20 years ago. The majority opinion was written by Justice Kennedy. Remember him? Justice Kennedy in Lawrence v. What was Lawrence v. Texas about? It was about a state statute in Texas that basically criminalized sodomy, specifically homosexual sodomy. It outlawed homosexuality as such. The facts of the case were that the police received a call that homosexual acts were taking place next door behind closed doors, mind you, in the privacy of their sphere, their home sphere. The police burst through the door, and it did indeed find a couple of men in flagrante delicto, right? So they arrested them and charged them with violating the statute that criminalized homosexuality. And that was, I believe, the facts of the case took place in maybe 1999. Eventually, this works its way up to the Supreme Court, and Kennedy, in the majority opinion, finds that, you know, this zone to privacy that Griswold and Roe establish includes sexual acts behind closed doors. The zone of privacy protects your bedroom and protects what you do in the bedroom. Number one. So that was just in 2002 that homosexuality was formally decriminalized in the United States. Texas was not the only state that had such statutes. You can imagine which other states had such statutes. Some individual states had already revoked old 19th century prohibitions against this. They got with the times very early, but any number of states did not. And so in many states, particularly in the South, particularly in the Bible Belt, still had formal prohibitions against homosexuality. And you can imagine, again, a parentheses, for a young gay boy growing up in the 1980s, who really doesn't really have even a vocabulary or a conceptual framework for understanding what homosexuality is, listening to Ronald Reagan and Jerry Falwell and others blaming the gays for everything that goes wrong in the world, reminding us that homosexuality is both a sin and a crime, and the kind of chilling effect that has on one sort of existential outlook. And, you know, to go back even further, 1974, again, the year that Roe was decided, was a big year because the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the DSM, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. It had been a mental disease up until then. And only in 1974 did the psychiatrists decide that this is not a mental disease, and that we needed to think differently about it. Instead of medicalizing it or trying to change it, we should instead embrace it as one of many existential possibilities of life. That is not morally wrong, and in fact, the effort to sinify it, I don't have a verb there, but of the evangelical right to characterize it as a sin, and of the government to sort of embrace this notion that it's a crime or a security risk, was wrongheaded, and probably led to more problems, both for the individual person, but also for the institution, whether that be government or the church or the school or whatever, than anything else. We've all perhaps seen Mad Men. We've all maybe read Gore Vidal's The City and the Pillar. We all perhaps have gay friends who are of a certain age at this point. And they all remember what it was like in the 50s and the 60s and even into the early 70s, when you had to sneak around under the cover of dark, and wear a green tie on Thursday Did you know that was a thing in the 1950s? Wearing a green tie on Thursday was a signal that other gay men understood, right? It was a way to signal to other people, and only those other people who were also wearing green ties knew what that meant. So the closet up until the mid 1970s was extremely large and uncomfortable and damning. There's just a book out recently in the past couple of weeks on gay Washington and stories of public officials, public fonctionnaires, bureaucrats, high-ranking bureaucrats who led secret lives and were constantly at great personal risk. One of these stories, a particularly compelling one, included a top aide to Lyndon Johnson, who was his top aide when he was the Senate Majority Leader and eventually Vice President, and he was about to become his top aide in the White House when finally he was exposed as a homosexual. And his career ended within minutes subsequently. Right, so all of this effort to criminalize, moralize homosexuality probably did a lot more harm than anything else. So Lawrence v. Texas was extremely huge in formally decriminalizing homosexuality. And, you know, interestingly, very rapidly after that decision was issued, first, there were certain parts of state governments in particular, but also parts of the federal government that, you know, just decided, okay, that game's over, right? We're not going to play that anymore. But it wasn't until Obama that the federal government formally excluded homosexuality as a reason to deny somebody a security clearance or a top level job in an agency. You know, you can imagine all sorts of James Bond stories as well in this regard. So this is very recent that this has happened, right? That homosexuality has become largely acceptable as a so-called lifestyle. I hate that phrase, and I've heard it my entire lifestyle. But in any case, Lawrence, the decision in Lawrence, Kennedy's opinion in Lawrence, begins with saying there is a right to privacy, and that right to privacy was first found in Griswold and then affirmed in Roe, right? I can see you all sort of nodding along. You're following the breadcrumbs. You know where this is going. Second major case, much more recent, is Obergefell. Obergefell made marriage equality the law of the land. It's important that we say marriage equality, not gay marriage. I did not have a gay lunch today. My lunch was just the same as anybody else's. My marriage, were I to ever have one, would be just the same as everybody else's. So it's marriage equality. That's a recent case. That's only a few years old. And it too begins with the right to privacy. Now, in Obergefell, there are other rights that are, and legal provisions that are invoked as well. And some of them are economic. So it's not entirely based on the right to privacy. But in any case, it's a fundamental aspect of that case. So what happens then if Roe is struck down for the LGBT community? Well, we already know the situation with women, right? We are already seeing states anticipate the destitution of Roe. Oklahoma just signed into law the most restrictive anti-abortion law in the country. Alabama failed to do so, but they came close. Other states are preparing. They're getting ready. We know it's going to happen with the right to autonomy over your own body, with the right to choice, right? And how to handle your own medical decisions. Medical decisions. So this could include not just the fact that you have sorry for this phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway, an alien entity in your body that you might not want there for any number of reasons that are entirely your own business. But because it is a medical procedure, this could include other medical procedures as well, about what you can and cannot do with your own body. So, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is, you know, euthanasia, right? The right to kill you, terminate your life if it's fundamentally unlivable. The right to pursue alternative therapies, right? Etc. We also know, based on what's been happening over the last 9 months, what states are doing to prepare for the destitution of Roe with regard to the LGBT community. In Florida, they signed into law the Don't Say Gay law, which, okay, that's kind of a bit of a misnomer. You can say gay in Florida. It doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to teachers talking about homosexuality in schools where students are less than 12 years old. But you can imagine why that's a problem for students less than 12 years old who have 2 mommies or 2 daddies. If they can't talk about what's going on in their family, if they can't talk about their family as just another normal family, right, then this is gonna cause some problems. We already know it's causing problems. In Ohio, Karen, pay attention to this. In Ohio, just last week, this is really, truly shocking. There's an education bill that passed through the House of Representatives, the State House of Representatives in Ohio. And late at night, some evangelical freak appended what's it called, amendment to the bill that is called formally the Protect Girls in Sports Amendment. Protect girls in sports, but what's that really about? Is it about protecting girls? No, it is not. It's about outing trans students. And this amendment is really, truly shocking. What it says in a nutshell is that anybody, it could be the coach of the other team or a member of the other team or a parent of a player on the other team, or anybody who's sitting in the audience can point at a girl on the playing field who might be doing particularly well. She might be a little too good, and say, hey, I don't think that's really a girl. I think that's a trans athlete. And then that person, whether they be a girl or a trans athlete, doesn't matter who they are, then has to be subjected to a medical evaluation. A medical evaluation that includes an examination by a doctor of their genitals. 12-year-old girls could be accused by anybody of being a trans person. And if that accusation happens, if they want to continue playing on that team, they have to prove through medical testing that they really are a girl. That hasn't passed the Senate yet in Ohio. So there's hope that maybe through some advocacy in the Senate, some organization that maybe has a team dedicated to Ohio politics might be able to help do something about it, help block it in some way. But if it passes the Senate and it's signed by the governor, it could become the law of Ohio. That seems a pretty clear violation of the right to privacy, which may not exist anymore under Roe. And that's not just about LGBT members, that's about any girl who just happens to be too good at sports could be accused. And even worse, there is zero recrimination for the accuser. The accuser could be entirely wrong, doesn't need to justify why he or she is making the accusation, can just point to somebody and say, oh, that one. and zero retribution, zero consequence for that person. We see this happening all over the place. Texas has recently, I'm not sure if it's actually the law of the land yet, but it probably will be if it isn't already, has declared through its newest law that the parents of trans children will become criminals, as will their medical professional, if they give gender affirming care to their trans child. Their trans child can be taken away from them by the state child protective services. That's a funny name in this case, isn't it? Child protective services. And the parents and the medical practitioner can be subject to child abuse charges, child endangerment charges, criminal charges. There are people in Texas who have trans children who are now absolutely petrified of what this means for them, right? Trying to move, to find jobs elsewhere in this economy, the dawn of a recession looming on the horizon. And why should they have to move from a place where they have lived their entire lives? Because of a minority group of people who happen to have power in the state at the moment. We see this in so many states: Florida, Texas, Ohio, of all places. And I think 37 states total have some sort of legislation in committee or in the hopper that is directed against LGBT, particularly T members of the community. They're ready for Roe v. Wade to fall, because when it falls, they can proceed with impunity with these kinds of measures. It gets worse, because if the right to privacy suddenly is called into question, even Obergefell, right, which at the federal level says no individual state has a compelling state interest to deny the rights, RIGHTS, to same-sex couples of marriage, suddenly that could be reversed. So suddenly, same-sex couples who have been enjoying the protections of marriage for the last X years might find their marriages invalidated. And other couples who are seeking to join in matrimony may not be able to. That could be on a state-by-state basis. Scared yet? Well, let me scare you even more. The algorithm. You all know about the algorithm, right? On Facebook, on Amazon, on Google, on Twitter, on all of these large platforms. Follows you around everywhere, keeps track of what you're looking at and what you're doing. You've all had this happen, right? Where you go looking for a new dresser drawer on a drawer of dressers, you know what I mean, on IKEA. And then suddenly all you see is IKEA ads on Facebook, right? Imagine you're a young gay or lesbian teen who is living in a somewhat oppressive household or community, and you're looking online for ways to understand yourself. Maybe you don't even understand yourself yet. You don't know what you're looking for, but you keep surfing and landing on pages that appeal to you, to your sensibility, your aesthetic sensibility. The algorithm, keeping track of you, is going to feed you more things that you have liked or spent more than 5 seconds looking at. The algorithm knows that you are an LGBT before you do. Now, these are private companies, right? Amazon, Facebook, etc. These are private companies. And so if you're willingly giving your information over to them, even by using their product, they can sell that information. They can sell that information to anybody they want to. And they do already. We know this, right? This is one of the big problems of the internet age. They package, and this was Cambridge Analytica, right? They package and they sell this data. There's nothing stopping them from selling it to governments. So imagine, not just in America, that's already, I mean, what we should be talking about, but think about it globally as well. Think about places like Hungary, Poland, Russia, right? Where you're at real risk of losing your life because of information the government acquires about you. America is really not all that far away, sadly, from Hungary, Poland, and Russia in this regard. We're one election away, maybe two at the most. Two bad outcomes this year and 2 years from now, right? Could mean real existential risk just for trying to find out information about yourself on the internet, trying to understand who you are and what that means. And if there's no regulatory framework in place, and really there isn't, as there is, but if it's not backed up by some sort of, constitutional right, we're all at real risk here. All of us, not just women and their right to a medical procedure, their right to choose, not just LGBT members and their right to try to discover their own history and their own identity, or to marry someone they love. All of us are deeply, deeply at risk if Roe v. Wade falls. And it seems likely that it's going to. Now, Alito, in his opinion, says, oh, don't worry about these other cases, right? This is just about Roe. This is just about the right to abortion. He's right in saying that you do not have a constitutional right to abortion. He is absolutely wrong, absolutely, completely wrong in saying, oh, don't worry. This is just about that one case. It is not about that one case. It is about all of these cases. And we will, within 5 years, see each and every one of those precedents challenged through the appellate court system, right up to the Supreme Court, and some, if not all of them, will be struck down if Roe goes. The only solution, really, and it's an impossible solution given the political climate in the United States, is to pass an amendment to the Constitution that guarantees our right to privacy. Now, you know what's entailed in passing an amendment to the Constitution, but America is fundamentally out of step with the rest of the world on this point, as it is on so many points. When you look at the Constitution of France, I forget what article it is, but I think it might be 53. I can't remember for sure. La vie privée est sacrosanct. Private life is holy, right? Sacrosanct, right? In the Italian Constitution, it's way up high. It's one of the top 10 articles. Your right to privacy. In the German Constitution, it is explicitly stated. The British don't have a written constitution, but in their common law interpretation of their laws, they have affirmed many times that there's a right to privacy. Canada has a right to privacy in its constitution. Every major liberal democracy has a right to privacy explicitly stated. We alone do not. And because we do not, the risks over the next few months to few years are enormous. So I hope I scared you sufficiently with that little analysis of what Roe means on a broader level, not just for women, not just for families. I forgot one thing. one other famous case decided before Griswold, but certain Republicans in states are already talking about this, already talking about loving. You know what loving is? It's the constitutional, the Supreme Court case that said it's okay for people of different races to marry each other. Now, that's not based on the right to privacy, but it does sort of anticipate some of the arguments that were carried over into Griswold, right? So there's already some states saying that, oh, you know, maybe miscegenation is open to debate again. The dominoes will keep falling. So voila, that's my horror story for the evening. If you need a drink at this point, feel free to have one. But I could use one at this point.
Bob, while you get your drink, maybe do we have any questions or comments that if you do, you could put your star hand up, type it into the chat, and we'll try to recognize it. Or you could raise your hand, but we won't see it. Sarah Jane.
Okay, I'm doing it the old-fashioned way.
That's okay.
So I have a question. So with regard to the reversal of Roe v. Wade, the states have been, they're getting ready. And they've enacted new laws. So as soon as it falls, that they're ready. But with regard to homosexuals, LGBTQ, how does that work? If their previous laws, would they automatically go back into effect, or they have to pass new ones, like they are for the abortion issue?
So when a law, like with Lawrence v. Texas, for example, strikes down any statute as unconstitutional that outlaws or criminalizes homosexuality, they're declared null and void, basically. So states would have to pass new statutes to recriminalize homosexuality. And some states are getting ready to do so. The same would be true with marriage equality. If eventually Obergefell is challenged successfully, states would be able to regulate marriage on their own. And so they could conceivably say that marriage is exclusively between a man and a woman.
Others? No? It was.
I'm just going to jump in here and say thanks for scaring the bejesus out of us, Bob.
Yeah,
because
got a question. Oh,
I was going to ask Bob, okay, what's our next step? What can we do as lowly voters? What do we need to do to make a difference here?
Well, we need to pay attention to what's going on in states. You know, a lot of this, Republicans know that these are not popular topics with the mass voter base. So they try to keep these things as low profile as possible until it's too late, like slipping amendments into a bill at midnight, right? Amendments don't have to be publicized anywhere or published anywhere on a registry. They can be added at the last minute, but there are legal projects that are registered. You can use, what's the website that we all use to keep track of laws that are being considered in states. We can pay attention to see what's going on where. We can be connected with organizations like the HRC and other LGBT groups that do surveil regularly what's happening in the states and send up warnings about it. This is how I found out what was happening in Ohio, right? It was through an alert from the HRC. And then once those things are in motion, right? I mean, first we can try to prevent them from even being considered at all. And you know, I use this statistic, 37 states are considering different forms of legislation. That's true, they're considering it. But thanks to vigilance and thanks to activism, it remains merely at the level of consideration. by aggressively working with Democratic allies on committees and subcommittees, we can prevent these projects from making it out of committee and making it to the floor for a vote. And that's happened quite successfully in a number of places. So, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Being vigilant and sort of planning ahead is important. But then, you know, like with this situation in Ohio, they slip it in at midnight, it gets voted on. Most people don't even notice that it's there. It's in an otherwise innocuous bill about teachers, right? So they vote for this bill for teachers without noticing that there's this amendment. You know, this may be why Democrats Abroad, for all of our parliamentary procedure that takes up 5 days of time, is not so bad sometimes. But in any case, it's passed the House. So now it's going to the Senate. We know that it's going to the Senate. So we have to direct our attention to the Ohio Senate, work with allies there to, again, try to prevent it from getting out of committee. We have to draw attention to it so that everybody becomes outraged about it, so that everybody's focused on it. And then we might be able to prevent it from passing the Senate in Ohio. If it should pass the Senate in Ohio, then you have to attack the governor, pure and simple. One thing we can hope for is slowing it down enough that we get to the election, right, and flip a House or flip a Senate seat, or time runs out on the legislative session, so it is voided, it falls to the floor and has to be reintroduced the next time. Those kinds of tactics work to prevent something from making it through the process, but it does not stop people from introducing them again. So the other thing we have to do is vote in local elections. You have to vote for your state representative, not your US congressman. Yes, you have to vote for him or her too, but you have to vote for your local state representative. You have to vote for your local state senator. We oftentimes tell people or encourage the belief that, no, you should not do those things because there might be a risk of state taxes at that point. And in some states, that is a real concern. But not in all states, right? So we have to be aware of the implications of voting in those kinds of elections. And if there are none that are going to be deleterious for ourselves or for our fellow Ohioans or Michiganders or whomever, then we need to really encourage people to vote in those elections, which means awareness and education. First and foremost. But you know, that's the only way things are going to change, is if we change the House, the Senate, the governorship in those states. And in some states like Ohio, we have some real reasons to be optimistic, you know, with the Senate candidate Tim Ryan, who is a good Italian boy. He's half Italian, yeah. And despite the name, you know, the Irish and Italians, they hooked up a lot. So, but he's a good Italian boy. In Pennsylvania, we have a chance with Fetterman, right? We're, with regard to the US Senate, we've got a reasonable shot of making it mansion proof, right? So if we can do that, then maybe we can pass something at the federal level as well, like the Equality Act. Which will make it illegal to discriminate people on their basis of their LGBT status, for example. But it's only through hypervigilance and hyperactivism that we're going to make a difference.
I saw that Claire had her hand up. Claire, do you have a question or a comment? You need to unmute if you do. Unmute.
Sarah Jane has her hand up the old fashioned.
Yeah, she's got her hand up as the hand up sign, but Claire had her hand.
Okay, unmute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, strategically speaking, you've mentioned some things that would be very important to have be, like just now you mentioned that changing an amendment doesn't have to be public. that seems that like something that we should be demanding so that citizens know that somebody's trying to slide something, into the legislation. I know in the Loving case, I think it was somebody in Alabama was already voicing an interest to
That's
throw
right.
it all out.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So it seems to me we should have strategic policies to attack every effort across the board in every circumstance to maintain the rights that we've already gained.
Correct.
We
But,
need to be on the offense.
I agree. But the funny thing about amendments to bills is that, those, just like in Democrats Abroad, and Karen knows and Stacy knows, they suffered through AGM recently. You can slip those in at the last minute and try to get people to approve them. But the reason that you can do that is a matter not of laws, but of rules, right? So each state legislature, just like the US Senate, the whole idea of the filibuster is not a law. It's not a law. It's not in the Constitution. It's a rule of the Senate. And if enough senators have the political will, they can change those rules, right? So what can be made public or more public is the rules of each state legislature, which are always adopted in the first meeting of the new session, right? And sometimes they're fairly general and generic and maybe only a page or two, but sometimes they're incredibly detailed and convoluted. But knowing what those rules are, knowing how the rules are adopted, that's one thing that is possible. If we see that, for example, there is a rule that allows you to slip in an amendment at midnight on Friday, then maybe you can do something to protest against it. But the other bad thing about rules is that they're almost always adopted as a package, right? So that's a bit tricky at that level to do something about it. But if we have a very strong ally in a state legislature who is willing to go to the mat for these kinds of things, then we should definitely leverage that relationship. It's just there are very, 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 very
Can I
few
ask-
politicians who have that kind of.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
The Equality Act, first I want to say thank you for your thoroughness. I missed a little bit at the beginning. I will go back, but thank you for your overview. I really, really appreciate it. The Equality Act, has there been any important writing around the Equality Act, like books that you think would be worth looking at? Because, for example, that would seem to be absolutely essential to get to the point where we can pass that.
Yeah. I don't know that there's been a book written on it. I don't think there has. There's been some think pieces published here and there. I recall one piece in The Nation many, 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 many months ago now about it. One of the things about the Equality Act, though, is that it's not particularly strong, right? If we have to do it again, if this session expires and, God willing, we hold the majority and maybe gain some more seats in the Senate, sorry, I should not say God willing, voters willing, we hold the majority and gain a couple of seats in the Senate, then we could reintroduce another version of the Equality Act that would actually have some teeth to it, and that would be meaningful. The general sort of common view on the Equality Act was that it was a show piece. It was a show horse, not a workhorse. Because it didn't have any consequences. It didn't have any, it wasn't like the Voting Rights Act, right? It was more of a declaration than anything else. So what we need is a piece of legislation that's actually meaningful. And in order to have a piece of legislation that's actually meaningful, we need a majority, a real majority that will be able to pass it. And, a real majority, unfortunately, in the Senate means 60 people. Now, that's a rule. That's not a law. So if we have a Manchin-proof majority, if we have 53 senators, Democratic senators in the Senate, we could and I say this with the caveat that Schumer is a spineless schmuck, but if we did have a Manchin-proof majority and there was enough political will there, they could pass a package of rules that would basically override the pretend filibuster. That's what that is, that rule of 60. It's a pretend filibuster, right? All the Republicans have to do is say, no, you don't have 60 votes, and so no, game over. They could pass a rule that says if you really want to filibuster it, then you have to do it the Mr. Smith goes to Washington way, right? You have to get up there and stand there for 48 hours or however long it takes and read, Green Eggs and Ham 25 times or whatever you have to do and piss in your own pants in order to have a filibuster. And if that were the case, if that were the rule, then suddenly Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and maybe Mitt Romney and a couple of other pretend moderate Republican senators might say, okay, this isn't worth it. So we can get behind this bill. We can let it go to the floor, right? And then it could pass.
I've got Sarah Jane in the queue and then Gina, and then I want to clarify Judy's question. So Sarah Jane first. Unmute.
Well, before we go to Sarah Jane, I'm sorry.
I can't. We've got
Okay,
time.
go
Everybody has to have a turn.
Go ahead.
So I'll come back to you if we have time, okay?
First of
Okay.
all, I want to pass on apologies from Randall and Barry. They had something come up, so they couldn't join us, and they're really looking forward to the recording. And then what I wanted to ask was, considering that Andrea has been on the front lines of these same sort of legislative developments in Greece, do you see the same sort of backsliding that we are anticipating in America? Do you see that happening here as well, Andrea? Or is it now legislation so that cannot happen?
I did an interview for Greek media just before this Zoom. And I said, I never imagined that what I'm seeing in the United States that I would ever see. I want to thank Bob for clarifying it all in one piece in such a short time. I think that things are only getting better here, and I'm happy to say that. There's still a long road to hoe, a long one for both women's rights and LGBTQI rights. But things are only improving slowly, incrementally. But Greece is a direct democracy. I think the essential flaws to what we're seeing in the United States, as we know, is that it's not a direct democracy, and your vote in New York means less than your vote in South Dakota, in effect. There are still a lot of problems in Greece, but public opinion is moving in the right direction. Certainly the numbers at Athens Pride and the reactions to our campaign and the sponsorships that we are getting, whether for whatever reason, point to a positive change. And I'm very happy to say that. Even though as I pointed out to the person that I spoke to before this, and I always point out whenever I'm asked to address LGBTQI or any rights, is that you can, and what we see is happening in the United States is that you can absolutely never take them for granted. That it's constant vigilance, constant, whether it's LGBT or Jewish issues or Muslim or immigrant issues. It's constant vigilance, because they can be blown away as we see now. I mean,
Okay.
Overnight,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks.
thank you for asking.
Just a quick reply to that. In Italy, you know, the access to abortion has never been easy in Italy, because it's a hugely Catholic country and the Pope lives here and blah, blah, blah. But they're emboldened right now. The right wing here is emboldened by what's happening in America. So there's now public discourse happening in Italy about following America's lead and making it even tougher on women to have access to this procedure. And they've never been a terribly gay friendly country. I mean, it's not homophobic per se in most places, especially the bigger cities, but you know, homosexuality is still viewed as sort of weird. And they're emboldened by what's happening in America on that front as well. So America leads, for better or for worse. And other democracies that we think of as forward thinking, the right wing in those countries, this is true in France too, look to what's happening in America and feel emboldened by it and are pursuing similar agendas. So yes, you are exactly right. We must be continuously vigilant, both at home and where we happen to live.
And that said, I'm going to go on. Gina, you're up next. Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Thanks, Karen. Thank you so much, Bob. It was just fascinating and horrifying to listen to you, but okay, we need to do something. And the whole time I was thinking, these issues do not just affect Democrats. I mean, it's not just Democrat women who are getting pregnant or Republican men and women who love people of the same gender and all these things. And so I'm just wondering, in the tactical area of what can we do, is it possible to reach out to the Republicans abroad? Just perhaps a very naive question from somebody who's very new to being active in this group. I mean, I just know that, for example, under the former Guy's administration, Germany had an ambassador from the United States who was openly married to his husband, and he was an asshole idiot, but still he enjoyed this freedom to be married, I believe, to his partner. And why in the world are they shooting themselves in the foot by allowing these laws to be passed? I have cousins in Alabama who've had abortions, but they will vote Democrat, I wish they would. They vote Republican because they've been brainwashed or whatever. And just, is it possible to perhaps work together with the Republicans abroad? That's a question for you, Bob, and also for our leadership, who probably know a lot more about these things than I do.
So Republicans overseas, they're called, is interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's taxes, FATCA. They're completely different from us in terms of how they're constituted. They are not viewed as a state party by the Republican Party. They are basically a lobbying group. And to be a member of RO, you have to pay dues. And those dues end up basically funding the lifestyle of the chief lobbyist of RO, who again is concerned about one thing only, taxes. That's it. That's the only thing they're concerned about. So trying to approach them on a different subject is going to get nowhere, I think. There are some gay Republicans abroad. I happen to know one who was married to a Democrat abroad, believe it or not, until they finally decided that was an impossible relationship. And he's also a Trumpist, this guy. He's gay, but has no interest in taking up the cause of LGBTQ rights, though he enjoys all the benefits that the state of France affords to him as a gay man. So this hypocrisy that is just extraordinarily epidemic among Republicans, this is unbelievable and insurmountable. Even the log cabin Republicans, that's the sort of LGBT group within the Republican Party. It exists, believe it or not. The log cabin Republicans just basically cover their ears and their eyes when it comes to these kinds of discussions, because they're also interested only in economic questions. You know, they're economic liberals, right? In the old Lockean sense of liberal. They want government to remove obstacles to making money. They want deregulation in business, and that's it. So when it comes to even marriage equality, and that debate a few years ago, they were conspicuously silent on that topic, and many of them subsequently got married.
Thanks for that answer and for correcting my naivety. However, I'm a kind of person who I'm still going to try and reach out to the few I know still, and
Yeah, please
hope
do,
that they
because,
can be encouraged to give a damn,
maybe
if
you're
only
gonna-
for selfish reasons.
right? Maybe you're going to be the
Thanks.
lucky person who finds the one who is
Yeah.
really right.
You never know.
Never
Thank
know.
you.
We could probably go on about our chances with the Republicans overseas here in Greece, but I want to give Judy a chance because I know she's time limited. Judy, you put a question in the chat up here about voting down ballot. What exactly did you mean? Is it something Bob can answer? Unmute. 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 Okay, we're not hearing you. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I couldn't get to the thing to connect. We were talking before about what can we do, and voting for the lower level politicians or political positions seem to be a very important part of it. But we're blocked from doing that in my state. I can't vote for anything that is not federal. So what can I do? Lots of phone calls to America? Come on.
Well, that's an option. And you know, you don't have to pay for those necessarily. The Democratic Party does have several platforms, just as we do. You know, we have these calling campaigns, and we tend to call our own members, right? Our own members of Democrats Abroad, who, of course, we know are going to vote the way we hope they will vote. But we call them to make sure that they're requesting their ballot and to provide any assistance they might need. But there are platforms through your computer, over the internet, where you can call people in your state and encourage them to vote for this candidate or that candidate. And as part of that conversation, you can say, look, I am actually calling you from Greece. I'm an American abroad, but I grew up there, I vote there, that's my home, and it's still meaningful to me. You know, that doesn't cost you anything from your...
List of people you can call, because I haven't been there for 65 years. I don't know anybody there anymore.
So the Democrat, if you sign up for these kinds of calling adventures, the Democratic, the system, right? You go into your computer and basically the name and number will appear on the screen, and you just press a button and your computer dials the number, right? And connects you to the person if they answer. And you can speak directly to them that way. So you don't need to have a list provided to you. Basically, these platforms will do it for you.
Thank you.
And they often have scripts to them if you don't know what to say, but asking people what their issues are is a good way to cover that you may not be in country for 65 years. Also that. Claire, you had another, do you have a quick one? And then we want to go on and get something in about the Pride.
It's an extension. It's an extension of, I don't know if, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. It's an extension of the discussion around the Equality Act and some of the laws that were watered down to make them, as you refer to it, a show pony. Wouldn't it be incumbent on progressive gay legislators to be writing or at least having some kind of workshop in what would be a much more effective piece of legislation, so we have it in the ready?
It probably would be, and I imagine that there are people doing that. You know, the HRC has several, I don't know if they qualify as pieces of legislation just yet, but several proposals that they are constantly lobbying for. There are any number of Congress people in the House who are LGBT, who will put these kinds of proposals into the hopper, right? But then getting them out of the hopper and through committee is not easy. And you need dozens and dozens of co-sponsors. And to get co-sponsors and to get these things moving, you have to do a lot of horse trading. You know, I'll support this if you support that. And sometimes what they ask you to support is the contrary of what you want. So not only do we not have a direct democracy, we also have a system of legislative logistics that's just perverse in nature. What's her name? Rosa DeLauro, the congresswoman from Connecticut, is the one who wrote and ultimately got passed the act that extended benefits to families with dependent children during the pandemic, you know, provided extra assistance to families. And we in Democrats Abroad, she's a great friend of Democrats Abroad, called her up and said, you know, what about Americans with families abroad? And she listened very intently and took good notes and got back to us and said, look, I cannot make this happen without losing several co-sponsors. And if I lose those co-sponsors, I will not be able to pass this law, right? So that's not an LGBTQ example, but that's an example of just how totally crazy this system is.
Or intentionally set up like that.
Yeah, exactly.
They've worked their way up to it incrementally. I wonder if it isn't time now. I don't see other hands up in the queue. I think we could go on asking questions and, you know, hey, we can stay on until midnight, you know, but perhaps it's time to turn the microphone back to Bob for his fireworks finish. And then after that, Stacy and Andre, perhaps, you know, talking a little bit about what we'll do here. Bob?
Well, you make it fireworks finished sounds like, you know, I got a tall bill to pay there. But I do have two things that I want to share with you very quickly. One is just, I can be very quick about this first one. I'm going to share the screen here. I just have to adjust a couple of windows so that I can find the button. Here we go. It is Pride Month, right? And so the LGBT caucus is sponsoring several activities, several events during the month, particularly in the latter half of the month. And we're just about to add 3 more. First, together with the senior caucus, we have this really wonderful documentary film called Generation Silent, Gen Silent, which is about elder gays. And the kinds of difficulties they face, particularly with regard to health and medical care. It's a really moving documentary. On June 24th, with the Environmental Council, we're doing something on queer ecology. That's actually a thing. It actually exists. So I'm going to be talking about that on June 28th. We're going to have a teach-in about all sorts of the kinds of things that we've been talking about, honestly, here in this conversation about the Equality Act, about various trans issues and legislation directed at targeting trans individuals and their parents. We've got a couple of guests that we're lining up for that. We're gonna add an event, hopefully I'm gonna get it nailed down tonight or tomorrow morning, with the Black Caucus focusing on James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin. both of whom were really important Black gay voices in the civil rights movement, and James Baldwin in particular, timeless writing in a lot of ways. There we will have the director of the James Baldwin House from France talking with us. And I think we'll show a clip from a very good documentary on Bayard Rustin. And then we're just organizing something with the Youth Caucus as well. That will be a kind of intergenerational dialogue. The kinds of concerns that people who are 35 and under have in the LGBT community are very different from those of us who are 50 and older. Just the phenomenon of coming out has been significantly easier in the last 25 years, and even easier still in the last 10 years. When I was a teenager, there were none, not a single positive gay representation anywhere in the media. That was in the early 80s. And in the 90s, things started to change a little bit. We thought, oh, Will and Grace is so great, right? Because you have these two gay characters. Well, the kids today don't particularly like Will and Grace for any number of reasons. So just trying to sort out what, the differences are. Some gays and lesbians who are older than me have no problem using the word tranny. Because when it was in common use in the 50s and 60s, especially in the late 60s, it was a compliment. The trannies are the ones who led the revolt at Stonewall in 1969, right? But now the word tranny is a reason to cancel you if you use that. So the kinds of vocabulary that we use, the kinds of ways that we think about ourselves, have fundamentally changed. So trying to, and on the other side of things, the kids today, I hate to use that phrase, but I'm gonna again, are kind of ahistorical, right? They have no sense of why Pride Month is the month of June. They have no sense of why Pride is in particular celebrated the last weekend of June. There are reasons for that. And the principal reason, of course, is that on June 29th, 1969, Stonewall Bar was raided again by the police, the vice police. That was a common thing that happened, and they were arresting people. And of course, if you got arrested on a vice charge in 1969 at a gay bar, your career was over. Well, that night was the night that Judy Garland died, and the drag queens were having none of it. The police burst in and they fought back, and that's the origin of Pride Month. And kids who are 22, 25 years old don't know even who Judy Garland is. So, we're going to have this kind of intergenerational dialogue with the Youth Caucus. We're also very close, we're this close to nailing down a date with Tammy Baldwin, the senator from Wisconsin. So we should have news about that hopefully by the end of the week. So we got lots of activities planned, and we're planning more even into the month of July. We're going to try to make a bridge through the month of July to the month of August, because in the month of August, and in particular on the weekend of August 5th, we have this big event. Canal Pride in Amsterdam. So this is going to be huge. I hope we're already well on the way to breaking even. We're still a few $1,000s away from that, but this is an off-site website, and so I'm just going to quickly put the link into the. Oops, that's the wrong chat box. Sorry. Where'd Zoom go? Here it is, over here. Well, wait, I can't. Can I put it in the? Wait. Here we go. Okay, it's up here. Sorry. Wait. Chat. There it is. Chat. Here it is. Okay. So this is a site that I built just to sort of explain what this is all about. And on the why section, you'll see there's a sort of summary of what I've talked to you about tonight, why we're doing this. It has to do with Griswold and Wall row and the consequences of that. On the what, there is a description of all the great activities. You can see I'm not quite done populating this site yet, but all the great activities we've got planned during that weekend. We have a boat in the parade, the Canal Pride parade in Amsterdam. So if you want to be on the boat, it's a great way to spend the day with all of us. We're going to have some special guests. There's different ways that you can support this. If you can be in Amsterdam, that's great. There's all sorts of ways you can support us by being in Amsterdam. You can be a legend, an icon, a superstar. You can be on the boat. You can just have Cosmos if you want, or join us at the after party. There's all sorts of different price points. And all of these links will take you to the same place. I'll show you where in a second. But if you can't come to Amsterdam, if you can't make it, there's ways that you can help us out too. You can sponsor, I call them the go-go people, because these are the young people in Democrats Abroad Amsterdam who are going to be doing all the work, basically, to get the boat ready. So you can sponsor a place for them on the boat, or you can sponsor a balloon. You can buy these limited edition collector item t-shirts here, say gay, vote blue. You can sponsor a glitter blast to help us decorate the boat, or you can just be an ally. All of these links here, click here to be a glitter up the boat, will lead you to the Democrats Abroad website, to the event site for this. Amsterdam Canal Pride. And again, lovely image. I'm very proud of that image. I made that. But if you scroll down, you can see there's all of the different price points here. Ways to, if you're coming to Amsterdam, or if you're not coming to Amsterdam, you can contribute as little as $20. And every little bit will make a difference. And every single bit of profit on this is going to go to helping us get out the vote from abroad, to vote in every single election in the United States. And so many of those elections are decided by such a narrow margin, that we actually could make the difference in several cases. We actually could be the people who give us a mansion-proof Senate. So every single dime of profit is going to help us get out the vote in this upcoming election. So I'll pop that link into the box as well, so that you can click on it if you wish, and explore a little bit more. But the information is all over here on this other site. So voila, that's my, I hope that was fireworky enough for you, Karen. But voila, that's the pitch I wanted to make.
That was a great pitch. I want to go to Amsterdam. If I just could leave my apartment, I would, you know. Stacy, I'm going to hand over to you. Would you like to wrap us up? I mean, Bob, thank you. It was great. Everybody, you know, I think got a lot out of it. Stacy, you want to wrap it up for us with a little pitch for Athens Pride and
Sure.
Booth?
Bob, thank you very, very much. You were consummate in so many ways in describing what the problems are that we're facing and what the next steps are that we need to do. Coming up for us in Greece, we have Athens Pride on Saturday, June 18th. Dems Abroad will be there from noon until 7 o'clock when the Pride Parade begins. Their theme this year is Anif Orun, unconditional without limits. I like that a lot. It really makes a lot of sense. And of course, the biggest element is love. And we have to be inclusive. We have to allow people to live the lives they want to live as long as they're not bothering anybody else. So, you know, why not? If you can come out on the day, on the 18th, I would love to have as many of you there with me as possible. I'm to be sending out some love letters and letting you know that I would like you near me. And if you can respond back and let me know what times you can be there. And of course, after the parade, there will be our own after party. aside from picking up all of our paraphernalia that we haven't given away. Please also be able to bring an extra electronic notebook. My phone has unlimited data, so I will be a hotspot so that we can connect and get people registered to vote and make sure that they have their registration up to date if they're not sure. That's about it. So, Andrea, you want to say anything else?
Yeah, well, thank you for being there. I hope that your stand will be next to mine, as it usually is, because it's always a pleasant thing for all of us. I'm surprised that you said until 7. Why until 7? This goes on till midnight.
Well, the parade will start at 7, and I don't know how long we can all last. We are all of a certain age.
Well, I'm the oldest of the bunch, and I'll be there till the bitter end. Have you notified the production person that you will only be there till 7 because you're responsible for the chairs and
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I saw something that you won't have a float, right? You'll just have a block with a back. I hope that you stay there later, at least till the parade returns. So that I have, what?
We have our banner that our volunteers will be carrying once again. Love trumps hate.
Well, I hope that you stay a little longer than 7 o'clock, but at any rate, because the parade, it doesn't really start at 7.
I know, we're on Greek time. We're on Greek time.
No, honey, no, honey, you're on gay time.
As I put in the chat, as soon as I really wanted to speak from the stage, I don't think that our group is particularly ready for an American ambassador to speak, even though I was incredibly touched. He's asked for, he wants a personal meeting with me. And I gave the term late afternoon, because I'm so busy, I really can't before that. And at his residence and not at the embassy.
Super.
It's more convenient. So I'm meeting with him on at 5 o'clock on the 16th after being in a UN human rights defenders roundtable. So I will tell him that Dems Abroad, he has a commitment until something like 9 o'clock. So I don't think that he'll be around. I'm sure he's not going to be around to make the rounds and say hello, but I'm certainly going to tell him that you'll be there. I know he's a Democrat. For
You
sure.
think
For sure.
the support he's given for Biden, he would really be putting on a weird show if he didn't.
I'm looking forward to meeting him, actually, because this is really extraordinary that he has reached out to me, really like pointedly. So
Andrea, you might point out to him too that one of our members actually has done some sensitivity training around transgender issues with the embassy, I believe last year, could have been the year before. They're a little floaty, but can get more information for you about that.
Who is that? It's somebody that we know, somebody in our group.
Yeah, one of our members.
Good, great.
I will for you.
Greek-American relations have never been better, even under Syriza, which is completely shocking. And now that everybody's applauding the at least for now, departure, hopefully forever, of he who shall not be named, where things can only at least get better. So I'll let you all know on Saturday how that meeting went.
Okay, good.
Because I'll definitely be there to say hi.
Okay.
and
Great.
hopefully be right next to you. But it's going to be huge. It's going to be
Great.
huge.
Well,
Excellent.
especially after a 2-year hiatus, I think
Well,
people
this
are
is-
dying to get out.
Not 2019 was enormous, and we had
Yeah.
such big plans for 2020, and we clung on to hope even until March
Yeah.
that of 2020, even though the handwriting was on the wall. So we're also having a week starting on Saturday of events all over the city of various kinds, from film, everything you can imagine. And some of them are really, really good.
So if you get the information on those to us, Andrea, we can be putting them up on the Facebook page. I don't think,
It's on Facebook and Instagram. I'm terrible at this, but
Well,
there is a
so am I.
calendar of events and it's on my Facebook page, and I'll repost it. But if you follow the Athens Pride Facebook page, you'll get everything you need to know. There are a lot of events in Platia Kotia. And as I mentioned earlier,
so what we'll do is share it over to our page for our people, our members who don't follow perhaps the Pride page. I want to hand this over, Stacey. I don't know if you have anything more to say, but I want to hand it over to Sarah Jane to.
No, I'm done. I've said it all.
Yeah, well, no, it's okay, because this is an important event and we've got a lot of excitement about it. But
Just again, another big shout out. Thank you.
Everything is free. Athens Pride, everything is free.
Everything is
Thank
free.
you, Andrea. I'm really sorry I'm going to miss it. I'm really sorry. I
sorry
hope
too.
we've drummed up some support for you. And Bob, thank you so much. I
Yes.
can't tell
Thank
you,
Bob.
Yeah.
you know, it was really,
Fantastic.
really wonderful to hear. I think someone used the word concise. You know, you really laid the argument for worry, unfortunately, out to all of us. And if there was any doubt, well, there's no room for that anymore. And I think you've also energized all of us to get to the voting box, even on the down ballots where we can. So thank you. And I wish you best of luck in Amsterdam. Your website is beautiful. I love the graphics, and I love all your levels of sponsorship and participation. I think we are going to have to take some inspiration from that. Right? Right, guys? Give people some
Good ideas. Very good ideas.
The Black Caucus is already mimicking me for
All
June.
right.
So
Good.
I'm a trendsetter. Get on board before everybody's doing it, and then nobody will want to do it. So do it now.
Great.
Now.
Well, thank you
Well
so much.
done. Well done.
I'm sure you have
Bravo.
a busy evening ahead of you. So we
Busy
thank you so
evening.
much.
Food
you.
is ahead of me.
Thank
Food.
you, everybody.
yes.
Okay.
See you Saturday, the
Report.
18th, if not before.
Stop recording.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.